Imagine receiving an invitation to a royal feast. Not just any feast, but one hosted by the king himself. You arrive at a grand medieval castle, welcomed with open arms. There's music, laughter, roasted meats on silver platters, and goblets of the finest wine. The king, young but regal, smiles warmly as you sit beside him. You've made it, you're accepted, you're safe. But then, something changes. The music stops. A hush falls over the hall. A servant approaches your table carrying a strange object. Wrapped in cloth, he places it before you and slowly reveals what's inside. A black bull's head. You don't have time to react. Suddenly, guards surround you, weapons drawn. You're dragged away, the laughter silenced by the sound of steel. Moments later, you're executed. This is not a legend. This happened. And it's known in history as the Black Dinner, a horrifying tale of betrayal in 15th century Scotland that would inspire one of the most famous scenes in modern television, the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. But the true story? In many ways, it's even more chilling. Let's travel back to Scotland, 1440, a land divided by clan rivalries, power struggles, and political assassinations. Just 10 years earlier, King James I of Scotland was murdered in one of the most shocking royal assassinations of the medieval era. His attackers stormed his residence at Blackfriars Monastery and stabbed him over 20 times. He attempted to escape through a sewer tunnel, but it had been sealed off under his own orders for security. That decision cost him his life. His death left the throne to his 6-year-old son, James II. Too young to rule, James was placed under the care of powerful regents, nobles who claimed to govern in his name, but in reality sought power for themselves. Among these power-hungry men were William Crichton, the Chancellor of Scotland, and Sir Alexander Livingston, the king's guardian. But standing in their way was one formidable rival, the Douglas clan. The Black Douglases were one of Scotland's most powerful families. For generations, they had been war leaders and political powerhouses. Their ancestors had fought for Scottish independence, marching alongside William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. By 1440, they controlled vast territories, enormous wealth, and a private army that rivaled the king's forces. At their head was William Douglas, the 6th Earl of Douglas, just 16 years old, and his younger brother, David. Despite their youth, the Douglas brothers were a threat to royal authority. Their popularity among Scottish nobles and their military strength gave them immense leverage. Some even feared that the Douglases could one day overthrow the monarchy itself. Crichton and Livingston saw this as an unacceptable risk. But the problem was, how do you eliminate such powerful figures without sparking a civil war? The answer? Deception. Crichton and Livingston devised a plan. They would lure the Douglas brothers to Edinburgh Castle under the guise of friendship. There, they would be eliminated discreetly, with minimal backlash. An invitation was sent in the name of the young King James II, offering peace, reconciliation, and a royal feast to honor the Douglas family. The invitation was hard to refuse. In medieval Scotland, refusing a royal summons could be seen as disloyal, even treasonous. Trusting in the sacred bond of hospitality, the Douglas brothers accepted. They arrived at Edinburgh Castle with full honors. They were greeted warmly, taken to the Great Hall, and seated beside the 10-year-old king. The feast began. Musicians played, wine flowed, and dishes of venison, roasted boar, and sweet fruits were served. By all appearances, this was a genuine celebration, a gesture of goodwill, a promise of unity, or so they thought. As the evening wore on, the mood shifted. The music stopped. The room grew quiet. A servant entered carrying a cloth-covered platter. He approached the Douglas brothers and laid it before them. The cloth was removed. It was a black bull's head, in Scottish tradition, a symbol of death and execution. To receive a black bull's head was to be marked for death. The meaning was unmistakable. The Douglas brothers were stunned. Before they could react, armed guards stormed in. They seized the brothers and accused them of treason, claiming they had plotted to overthrow the king. There was no trial, no chance to defend themselves. Chroniclers describe that King James II, only 10 years old, was terrified. He reportedly wept and pleaded with Crichton and Livingston to spare the brothers, but his voice was ignored. The Douglas brothers were dragged to the castle courtyard where a block awaited. There, in front of the court, William and David Douglas were beheaded. The Black Dinner shocked Scotland. In medieval culture, hospitality was sacred. Even in times of war, it was considered dishonorable, even sacrilegious, to harm a guest under your roof, especially after breaking bread together. The murder of the Douglas brothers at a royal feast was seen as one of the greatest betrayals in Scottish history. It wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a political earthquake. The Douglas clan erupted in outrage. Far from weakening them, the Black Dinner galvanized their resolve. For decades after, Scotland would be plagued by Douglas uprisings, blood feuds, and noble infighting. Crichton and Livingston may have removed two young rivals, but they also destabilized the kingdom. The consequences stretched far beyond the immediate bloodshed. As James II grew older, the memory of the Black Dinner haunted him. It shaped his reign. He grew up distrustful, even paranoid, of noble families. Determined not to be manipulated as he had been as a child, James II developed a reputation for ruthlessness. In 1452, now a man in his 20s, he summoned William Douglas, the 8th Earl of Douglas, for a private meeting. Once again, a Douglas accepted a royal invitation, this time at Stirling Castle. When the Earl refused to abandon his political alliances, James II stabbed him to death with his own hands. His attendants joined in, and the Earl's body was thrown from a window. This event became known as the murder of William Douglas, and it echoed the Black Dinner. It seemed history was repeating itself. Centuries later, the story of the Black Dinner would inspire George R.R. Martin, author of A Song of Ice and Fire, the novels behind Game of Thrones. Martin has openly acknowledged that the Black Dinner influenced the Red Wedding, one of the most shocking events in the series. In both stories, powerful guests are invited under the pretense of peace, feast with their hosts, and are then brutally murdered. Even the symbolism of music, the silence before the attack, is mirrored. But what's often forgotten is that the Black Dinner was not fantasy. It's a real reminder that medieval politics were often governed not by honor, but by ambition, fear, and treachery. So, was the Black Dinner a calculated political move, or an unforgivable act of treachery? Perhaps both. But one thing is certain: in medieval Scotland, trust could be fatal, and even a royal feast could become a death sentence. If you enjoyed this true medieval story and want to hear more tales of real battles, betrayals, and forgotten history, make sure to subscribe to True Medieval Tales and like this video. I'll be back with more stories of knights, kings, and the brutal reality of the Middle Ages.